They just trip over themselves to, to try and, use state force to try and solve these things.
Oh,
Taxpayer money, they're petrified of being accused of not caring about self-esteem. And so they sign on to this thing. They have this big signing ceremony and they unleash this societal gremlin that ends up taking over essentially a large part of our zeitgeist in the 90s. I mean, this was everywhere. I don't know if you remember it, but this was on I wasn't a big Good Morning America watcher, but it was on there. It was on, Regis and Kelly. It was on early Oprah. It was on, all of these places, People Magazine. They all picked up this narrative that this had to be done, that the government had to be involved, and that the proper way to inoculate children from failure was to, pronounce every single one of them winners, even if they didn't win.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.
Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 359. I'm talking to Erich Hartmann. He's done a couple good articles on various issues, and he's been on here before. He's a fellow with the Brownstone Institute. We're going to talk about this philosophy of everyone gets a trophy, as some people like to call it. Erich has written some good articles about that. He's going to talk about how this took hold. How are you, Erich?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
It's a nice day here. It's getting a little cooler. It's we had some little rain yesterday, but so you came across this, and I commented on it, and I wanted to get your take on it. When and where did this all come from? You even referred to some bills that were passed.
Oh yeah. Well, so look, it comes up, every now and then, the idea of participation trophies, and it's one of those political things which I think, depending on what side of that issue you are, it seems to actually predict how you're gonna, settle on a lot of other important things. Um, and I don't know about you, but, ever since the idea of participation trophies, emerged in the culture, I was not super psyched about it. You know what I mean? It was one of these things that set my spidey sense off. I'm like, don't know about that. We all grew up in childhood. We were all, not everybody, but most people were involved in team sports or competitions. Obviously, not everybody is a winner or an expert at whatever it is. When I was growing up, I won some things, but most of the things I lost. I was, came in last place and whatever. And you don't, at least when I was growing up in the 80s, you didn't get a trophy, for just participating. Your team did not get a trophy for coming in last place at the T-ball tournament. It just didn't happen. If you won or you placed top 3, you got something, but you usually didn't get the trophy. Maybe you got a ribbon, and third place you got a certificate. But I remember in the 90s this stuff sort of burbling up, and I had friends like my brother was a little bit older than me, and he had kids, and they were kind of starting to experience this in the 90s. And I remember being like, "Really? They all got the trophy? What's your trophy there for? Okay, coming in last place, great. This can't be good." Um, so yeah, it's one of those issues that kind of burbles up, in the discussion every now and then. And long story short, the last time it kind of came up, it goes viral. Like somebody will make a comment about it, and then people read. You know what I mean? It sort of happens. And I decided to try and track down where the hell this came from. Because I remember it, appearing in the 90s. But as with a lot of these things, it came from a place. It came from an idea. It came from a man. And in this case, a very progressive politician in California, that this was his pet theory. And his name was John Vasconcellos. And he was a politician in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and he just believed that, self-esteem was the missing link. It was the cause of, you know, awfulness. It was a cause of crime. It was a cause of poverty. And it was his mission as a progressive to change how the government works and have the government money, government force to focus on the issue of self-esteem in kids and fix it, right?
Yeah.
As if the government can fix that. They certainly tried, but,
Yeah, how do
he
you
came
spell
from a
that name?
place.
John
Vasconcellos.
Baskinceus is one word?
Yeah, Vasconcellos.
Oh, okay. Former member of California State Assembly, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
2000
And he
1913.
and just,
Yeah.
looking for patterns, right? We're all trying to, figure stuff out and explain things and help
Mhm.
fix things, right? And,
Yeah.
you know, it's interesting, this guy he was raised in a not so great household. He didn't have a father. Um, and, again, he was a very progressive, I would call him a liberal. He was a progressive dude, a leftist. And, he developed this theory, based on his own, personal upbringing. And again, that's what we do. That's what most people do.
Yes.
But he never had kids of his own. He wasn't a father. He wasn't a family man. And,
Yeah.
yeah,
All these people who never had kids of their own, it's so isn't that wild? You
and
see
that's why I
that
mentioned it.
with so many of these alleged reformers that
It's a trend. Absolutely. We
it
saw that during
really
COVID too.
well, we live in a we're now living in a society, where I think people who don't have kids very much want to regulate people who do have kids, but we're going off
Oh,
topic.
absolutely.
Yeah, these and he was first elected in '66, and then looks like he was in the House since 1996, just a state
Yep.
legislator. I mean,
Just forever.
yeah, I mean, not that many people know well, outside of California, he probably isn't really known by that many people, but yeah, this is a long career, and you can certainly make a difference. And, there's often been that cliche that everything that starts in California eventually infects the whole country.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And, research, kind of tracking down the source of this, the source of participation trophies.
Yeah,
It was almost cliche all the way through. It was like, all right, here's an old school progressive dude from California, right? A career politician,
yeah,
somebody who, has an outsized faith in the state, to solve, to have a responsibility and to solve these things if they can even be solved. And it was interesting because, he spent his entire career on this trajectory and he ended up getting this thing passed, the Self-Esteem Act. It was the California Task Force to promote self-esteem and personal and social responsibility. This was under a Republican governor, and he got, co-sponsors from across the aisle. It was one of these, kumbaya moments between the right and the left. And I would argue that once again, Republicans and conservatives, and maybe even libertarians, getting hoodwinked and charmed by this essentially this threat of being accused of not being empathetic or sympathetic or helpful. And, they just trip over themselves to, to try and, use state force to try and solve these things.
oh,
Taxpayer money, they're petrified of being accused of not caring about self-esteem. And so they sign on to this thing. They have this big signing ceremony and they unleash
yeah,
this societal gremlin that ends up taking over essentially a large part of our zeitgeist in the 90s. I mean, this was everywhere. I don't know if you remember it, but this was on like, yeah, I wasn't a big Good Morning America watcher, but it was on there. It was on, Regis and Kelly. It was on early Oprah. It was on,
yeah,
all of these places, People Magazine, they all picked up this narrative. that this had to be done, that the government had to be involved, and that the proper way to inoculate children from failure was to, pronounce every single one of them winners, even if they didn't win. And, there was really no science or data behind any of it. It was just fluff and bullshit, and they just rolled this thing out, and it took over. And again, everybody was getting these participation it persists till to this day. I have kids, and I can't tell you the last time well, this last season, they did not win and they did not get, a trophy, but the coach, spent some money and bought little medals for everybody, you know? I was like, "All right, was that really necessary?"
Yeah, yeah, it's really hard to say. I should correct that, by the way. He went and he was actually out of the assembly in '96, but then he was also 8 more years as a state senator, so I guess that's upper house, lower house.
Yep.
So, but this is a very long career in a legislature, and doesn't look like he really had any ambition to go further. I guess he realized California was his, but yeah, it's definitely a I've been to things also where I remember, every when some of the things I was involved with, everybody got a certificate saying, "Yes, hey, you participated," but there wasn't really a trophy or anything. I don't even know what people do with those certificates, but this is a tough thing because there's so many, you know, Eric. This is one reason why I don't believe in public schools at all is because public schools have always attracted these social engineers who want to try to do these experiments and that obviously these kids have not consented to, and it really is kind of and it's almost always about, well, we're gonna try to reform them and make them into something that maybe they're not into, and maybe we should just, allow parents to do this if they want to. It's so wild, yeah, and so and this has become kind of a dogma, though, and I don't even know, does this even really help people get self-esteem? I question whether or not it does.
I would argue that it doesn't.
Yeah.
I think, it's pretty, I it's one of these things in life, it's like, how are you gonna learn? Failure is important, right? And I don't think anybody's saying, if you fail, you you mush their face in the air, right? Like, you don't rub it in, you know? Like, I'm sure there's ways to take that too far. But at
Well,
the same
yeah.
time, wrapping people in bubble wrap and not letting them experience the ups and downs of life is a real problem, and it certainly you brought this up at the beginning, it certainly is something that somebody who, doesn't have real life experience, that's a conclusion that somebody like that would come to, and this is a guy that was in, government for his entire life, right? Like, this guy didn't work, he didn't run a business, like, this is he was in his own bubble. And then his solution to society's ills was to put everybody else in a bubble.
Yeah, I don't know that much about his life. I mean, a lot of state legislatures, depending on the state, though, but most of them don't. They still have regular jobs. I don't know exactly what. There isn't that much on Wikipedia about his life here, so
Yeah,
it looks like he was at least part of a law firm. Well, it says he worked for a law firm, so yeah, he got a law degree. So yeah,
he's a creature of the state. Um,
yeah. There is something that I think is important though. Is I I do think you help kids build self-esteem by at least setting them up to create victories of their own. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a participation trophy, and especially if you can get them to do things that they didn't think they could do.
of course.
But but that's very different from that's also takes a lot more work and effort. It's so what exactly was this bill mandating or declaring?
Well, this was a report essentially. They created a task force to study this, and he got, a lot of money to do it. And then, they output this paper, which was heralded as this, you know, sea change, complete, hallelujah POV on this, again, supposed crisis of self-esteem.
Yes.
And yeah, exactly. It's a lot of the same vocabulary, right? And they framed the concept of self-esteem and how important it was to inculcate this into the young, the young minds full of mush. And they called it a social vaccine, so yet another friendly term that we've heard. But just this, this cure-all idea of, if we just fix the self-esteem, then we can fix everything, and the government should do it.
Yeah.
This is the purview of the state. Um, you know, how much money would you be willing to spend to solve our children's esteem crisis, right? Like that's the framing. If you go against that, you're a jerk. You're
Yeah.
a, you're a
And
meanie.
and we really can't deny that there are some kids out there who really do grow up in lousy situations,
Totally.
and they're not going, and maybe they have parents who are constantly putting them down. I think it's horrible, but I don't know how we can fix this. And sometimes you just gain self-esteem though by just having accomplishments, whether I mean, a kid will feel self-esteem the first time he walks or the first time he does something.
Yeah.
I I remember when my nephew figured out how to take a pen apart and put it back together, and he was so proud of himself, and he wanted to show it to me, and I went along with it, even though, of course, I already knew how to do it. But you go along with it anyway, and just because that's how and you just you yeah, it's I because I don't know where. Yeah, but there's also been this whole movement that more and more kids' lives are more and more just being managed by these experts, and nothing has gotten better. Yeah, I mean, where else has this come up besides in California? I mean, as I said, it often spreads out everywhere else. It's
Yeah, again, but you're right. Like a lot of this stuff does burble up in California, and it kind of gets out. And unfortunately, it gets out and it gets tested and it gets, it sees the light of day. And so much of it turns out to be hooey. And not only, hooey, expensive hooey and harmful hooey. Um, this self-esteem movement. And again,
yeah,
these terms bother me, right? Because it's like you're talking crap about the self-esteem movement, and then normies would be like, "Well, you're against self-esteem?" It's like, well, no, not really. It's about how you get there. Um, and on the heels of this, this in the early '90s, there were a couple of things that happened concurrently that sort of goosed the system. And that is, the main one was the rise of, sort of for-profit after-school sports franchises in,
yeah,
communities. Um, I grew up in the '80s. We had rec, we had rec ball. I played everything except football. But, by the '90s, these things were becoming corporatized, which
yeah,
is not necessarily a bad thing. But when you have the concept of, everybody getting a trophy, kind of coming down from a national level, you're seeing this on Oprah, you're seeing this on the Today Show, and all of a sudden your kid is, playing, rec ball, and the Sand Sharks come in last place, and all of a sudden you're getting like you know, there's a little bit of a reward for the fees and things that you pay. And there's also the trophy shops and, these other interests. I mean, it's not like big trophy or anything, but these are, moneyed interests that perpetuate these things, right? And I don't think, anybody's out there going, "Hey, let's screw up these kids." But when you have these things that sort of wash over society, it's not surprising when other interests get involved and they get kind of their hooks in it. And there's a symbiotic relationship that perpetuates things that are not exactly healthy. You know what I mean? That happens with everything. And that's why you have to be so careful with this stuff, especially if it's wrong, especially if it's harmful. And frankly, I think there's a lot of evidence that, I wouldn't say that participation trophies are 100% terrible, but on whole, they are. They're mostly unhelpful. They're mostly damaging.
Yeah, I think largely also because they just don't seem to make people wanna work. Uh, they don't really want to, uh, it almost seems like this is about devaluing the good too, though, but, I've learned more and more that the issue is never the issue, and there's always something very personal behind what people motivate, and this
Right.
and here's a guy, I was raised Catholic too. It's like you're always a sinner. You're never good enough, so you have to it's almost like he's doing something to work through his own issues via legislation, which unfortunately is something people do a lot, uh, to buy into these fads, and he was part of this human potential movement, and people like Carl Rogers, oh, heaven knows, I'm sure Oprah licked this up like it was no tomorrow.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yes, I mean, and this was in the '80s, and she had was arguably more powerful than anybody out there. I mean, just yeah, Oprah.
But that goes to my point about sort of this symbiotic relationship. This was right up Oprah's alley, right? And she did umpteen shows on this, right? So did the Today Show. So did these other things. People like this was content for them. This was fodder for them, and so
Yeah,
it made sense for them to sort of perpetuate it in a way, right?
I'm also seeing that even, Gary Trudeau was talking about this in Doonesbury.
Oh yes, yes,
Isn't
he
that
did.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and
There was
again,
pushback there was
that's
pushback at
another
the time, from a lot of different sources, honestly.
yeah,
But this was an industry, they industrialized this idea, and it's one of these things, it reminded me of, I mean, it's a lot like the COVID stuff, but it's a lot like the famous sugar study that, the sugar industry hired Harvard to conduct this study back in the I think it was the '50s, about why Americans were getting so fat and, having heart problems and stuff. And they determined, that it was fat and salt that was harming everybody. And, it took us, up until recently to sort of, shake free of that. You realized it was, sugar, processed foods and sugar mostly. And but that had the weight of official studydom behind it, right? They changed our food pyramid because of that. We had decades of erroneous nutrition advice from our government based on, this study and the subsequent studies. And these things roll, they get critical mass, and critical money, and they become a thing. They become the default. And the same thing happened with the self-esteem movement. There was funny studies that happened that, it was, bad data that was completely swallowed hook, line, and sinker and regurgitated as fact to the public. And, you had Oprah, crowing about this. And then you had moms and dads and even coaches of little league teams who were like, well, I don't know. I don't want to hurt the kids. Everybody gets a trophy. Right. And again,
yeah,
it's, you know, that's the way this stuff happens, and it sucks because sometimes you gotta be the dude or the dudette that stands up and is like, "This is wrong." You right? Everybody's like, "Boo, you're taking a trophy away from little Timmy." It's like, ugh,
yeah.
somebody's gonna say it.
Well,
Sorry.
one of the things growing up, I always felt kind of annoying is you get something and you would kinda think that it was a big deal, and then you realize that it wasn't such a big deal. Something, for example, like being listed in Who's Who among American high school students. That there were actually no standards for that, and it literally just ended up that, but anybody who was in there would buy the book, so they'd wanna list as many people as possible. And first I thought, well, I thought this was some kind of big deal. It's like, no, it's not. And and that really, I think that also annoys the people who 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 worked hard and they realize, oh, my working hard isn't worth that much, and
Yeah, that happens.
it inevitably devalues the people who did work harder, right?
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of on the other end, right? Like, there was a reason why this this self-esteem crisis. God, I hate the language crisis. Everything's a crisis.
Yeah,
But there's a reason why it kind of took over, and that we're still dealing with the tails of it. And it's because of what you just said. There's abuse on the other end, right? There is.
yeah. Well, and you always end up dealing with somebody who wants to try to profit from you tell people there's a problem and then you sell them the fix for the alleged problem,
That's right.
and then you profit from that. So it's
Well, these guys defined the problem. They're the ones that said it was a problem. They sold it through. They got a lot of, co-signers.
yeah,
And then they were the ones that were offering the solution as well. And it wasn't necessarily a corporate solution coming from, Vasconcellos in the California legislature, but it did become, there were several books written about this. People made money from it. But this kind of stuff is religion to progressives. And you know this.
yeah,
You know, this is why they do this. This is a childless dude who, didn't have a great upbringing, and he was not a religious fella. This became his calling. This became his, as close to his soul. He wanted this to, be his legacy. It was,
and yeah,
but he was wrong.
and I wouldn't necessarily say that I don't think he necessarily had bad intentions either. I mean,
I
maybe
would grant him the best intentions
yeah,
possible. I don't think that matters.
yeah. It ultimately it doesn't matter, but it's still Eric. There's something else going on here too, though, and I really and I'm also very much partial to the philosophy of free range kids and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, same.
You go back. And I would tell if I had kids nowadays, I would have them watch things like The Little Rascals, sitcoms from the '50s and '60s, maybe Leave It to Beaver, and I'd want them to see how kids live because kids were doing a lot of things that were self-organized. The kids would go out to the grass field somewhere and, maybe put down pieces of paper on the ground and call that a baseball field, and they'd play baseball,
Yeah.
and that's what kids did. It's and now and I think that's very healthy when the kids are doing it as opposed and nowadays, kids are always there's a league for everything now, and but it's really, how did we go from that to where we are now? It's
Uh, Screens, social media,
yeah,
computers, inside stuff. It's tough, man. As a parent, it's very tough.
yeah,
We were the last ones. We were the last ones to give our kids, phones and iPads and stuff. And it just sucks. It's like it really kind of comes down to, once they hit their teens, man, it's like if they don't have a phone, they don't have a social life. They don't, eh, they're on the outs. And
yeah.
that's
You
tough.
got kids, Eric, or not?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have kids.
How old
Um,
are
12 and 14.
okay, yeah, that's
Good
just
ages.
yeah, what I mean, what do they think of all this? I
Well,
yeah,
interestingly about, participation trophies and stuff, they innately did not like it. Um, and I saw it a few times from both ends. There was 1 or 2 instances where they won, right? And they were psyched about winning, and then they saw, all the losing teams getting the same reward that they got. They were kinda like,
yeah,
"WTF?" Right? That's a very human reaction. And this is without us or me talking about it to them, right? I wasn't priming them. This was just a natural reaction. And then, saw it from the other end as well. And I think that I was pretty proud of my kids when they had this reaction, but it was like, "We lost. We were the worst team in the league. Why are we getting a trophy?" It was like they weren't really proud of the trophy. There's in their rooms, there are the ones that they're proud of, and then there's the other ones that end up getting thrown away. And it doesn't matter if it's a bigger or cooler looking trophy, they know where that came from. They know if they deserved it or not.
Yeah,
And I was as a parent, I was pretty psyched to see that mechanism kinda going off in their brains.
and sometimes you do get that person where somebody gets them and they're not really proud of it because they don't think they did that well. Uh, there are a lot of different things going on with that. Eric, the one thing I've pointed out about smartphones and kids and cell phones, I wish we could go back to that, but the one thing is if we're gonna if we're going to try to go back to that, we somehow have to get a culture though where phones were available. When we were growing up, we could find a payphone if we
Yeah,
needed one, and that's impossible now.
yeah.
I
Or
remember
collect if you didn't have a
I remember, yeah, and or if it was local, a kid could find a quarter or even I can remember it was a dime, and it wasn't hard. And sometimes, if you were a kid, somebody would just give you a dime. They said, "I got to call my parents,"
Yep.
but so and I don't know how we get that back, but where you have a landline at home because everybody,
Nah, we don't.
yeah, and it's because yeah, it does really. Maybe if parents all kind of organized and you had a collective and saying, "Hey, we're not
Mhm.
getting our kids cell phones," because the Amish still have that.
Yeah, the Amish, they're doing some stuff right. Um, but yeah, I don't think there's any going back, they all have most of the kids have their phones, um,
Mhm.
and they're exposed to stuff, porn, extreme violence, you know, good ideas, bad ideas, from a very
Oh, yeah.
early age. Again, it's like, we put as many restrictions, we look as much as we can at what they're looking at and, who they're interacting with, but it's impossible to completely police that. Um, when the iPhone first came out, I remember thinking like, gee, in a couple decades, everybody's gonna have a porno, you know? And I don't know, I just think I'm not like Mr. Moral or anything, but you know, I don't know, it's gonna be interesting
Yeah.
because I think a lot of these limits and these barriers that were on us in terms of what's acceptable and what's not, just by definition are just being blown out of the water.
Yeah.
And I really don't know what the outcome is gonna be because, you know, it's just tough. I don't want my kids were both of my kids were exposed to hardcore porn during COVID.
Yeah.
Because the stupid ass school, gave everybody these Chromebooks, immediately, and they're like, "Oh, we're doing great."
Yeah.
But they didn't have the IT backbone, right? That was the first time they gave kids in elementary school computers, and the IT person at the elementary school was this was this teacher's aide, right? I guess she was the youngest one that they were like, "All right, you're in charge of the computers," and she
Oh,
didn't know
yeah.
how to lock them down. And some hacker asshole, I mean, there's really creepy ass people out there, and somebody got into the computers, and during a Zoom, all of a sudden, every kid's screen was showing just some really reprehensible hardcore porn.
Yeah.
And, you had hundreds and hundreds of kids seeing shit live with sound, HD, that you and I probably didn't see until we were in college, you know?
Yeah.
And I struggle with that. Like, I don't know, is that gonna ruin them? I guess it won't. Is that the worst thing? I mean, would I have rather that not have happened? Of course, like, that's bad. I would not have wanted that to happen.
Yeah. Well, you and I are in that age bracket where the first time we saw naughty pictures, it was very likely in a magazine.
Yeah, yeah, and they
And
weren't even that naughty, you
and
know?
and, and it wasn't yeah, there's stuff out there and it's definitely harder. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how you fix that either. I think parents just have to be more vigilant and it kind of has made parents more vigilant. I can remember, having friends where there was, just one TV in the house and And when I was growing up, I was one of the few kids who didn't have HBO, and that was where the bad stuff was.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah. It's
HBO,
movies.
yeah, where the not because it was in some ways we're bombarded with so much stuff that it's just getting harder for us to manage what we have. I mean, it's Kaczynski was kind of right with the manifesto when he says we're becoming over socialized. It's
Yep. I think that was kind of what I was trying to say, but maybe not as, technically, right? But, like, everybody's gonna these devices mean that our standards are gonna change, right?
yeah,
Whether they should or whether we want them to, there's just gonna be so much out there for public consumption, and it's gonna be everything from, violence, porn, bad ideas. But, on the other hand, there's good ideas and,
oh
art,
yes,
wonderful stuff that you're gonna be able to see that you weren't able to see. We're gonna have these conversations, right?
yeah,
We would have had to, been in person and traveled to meet meet in the middle or something,
and I
30 years
always
ago.
and it's always something in the back of my head. The porn industry pioneered this. Online video streaming came from they
Yes, it
started
did.
all that. Yeah, they did.
It did.
They were the first. I mean, before we had the Super Bowl online, we had that stuff online. They have made a lot of contributions to the
Absolutely.
technologies that we take for granted. It's so wild. But I just look, sometimes when I schedule my guests, I have, okay, I contact them on WhatsApp, I contact them on Signal, I contact them on Telegram, text message, email, Twitter message, Facebook messaging. I mean, I think that's the 7 messaging modalities I have, and I just, like, think, I wish it was just 2 or 3, Yeah,
It's
it's
overwhelming.
because sometimes, because every once in a while, I just go through a period where I kinda forget to check one of them for a while, and then it's like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't get back to you,"
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah,
It's difficult. It's good to have the options in a way, but at the same
yeah.
time, it's messy, for sure.
Well, diversification to a degree is good. It's better to own 10 different stocks than to own 1 stock, but I don't know if you necessarily benefit from owning 100 stocks versus owning 10 stocks.
I think you do.
There's always
I think that's the law of large numbers.
maybe, but there's always a diminishing returns when you get to a lot of exposure there. I gotta ask too, what did your kids think about, everything that was happening in 2020? I always love to get a feel for what the kids are talking about and what they're thinking.
Ah,
What do you tell them? Do you tell them our society's gone crazy, everybody's crazy? I mean,
yes, I did. I was very early on COVID. I think you and I talked about this a little bit last time, but,
yeah,
I mean, the long and short of it is I saw those Chinese fainting videos. Remember those? The videos, the
mhm,
CCTV footage that they just happened to catch,
yeah,
people falling in China. I saw those on, I don't know, Instagram, and I'm not a big social media guy, but, like, maybe TikTok or something. I browse them occasionally, but I think I saw it, on TikTok, and it was right around Christmas time in 2019, and I remember showing them to my wife. I was like, "Man, look at this.
yeah,
People are falling down in China." And my wife goes, "That looks fake." Right?
yeah,
She was at that point, she was right, but I was still in the mode of, I had seen the movie Pandemic. I'd read the books about
yes,
the Spanish flu, and so I was still in the mode of, "Oh my gosh, something like this could happen," right? There could be a virus that pops up over here, and it could sweep the world with, airplanes and all this stuff, and, so I was concerned about it in January of 2020, and I bought masks, I bought hand sanitizer, I bought, supplies, bought, like, rice, a shit ton of rice, but nobody cared, like, nobody was paying attention to this, because they were paying attention to the impeachment, um, and,
yeah,
Trump tried to bring it up a couple times, and people accused him
yeah.
of being racist or trying to change the subject, but,
Well, yeah,
so
well, what else was on my mind for a while there too was, I was thinking a lot about Kobe Bryant. That was another
well,
thing.
that happened in the yeah, that happened too.
That would happen in early February, I think, yeah,
That's
Kobe.
right, that's right,
Since I'm a lifelong Laker fan, yeah, but,
um, but, to answer your question, it wasn't like I was freaking my kids out about it, but we did talk about it. I was like, "Hey, everybody, this looks like there's a,
Yeah.
a potential thing burbling up in China. We should just be aware." And, I was the only person I knew that was interested in it. We had, my cousin was flying to where was he going? He was going to Italy at the time, and that was right around Bergamo, like, when Italy was having a problem. Like, "What are you going to Italy?" And he's like, "Ah, we'll be fine." He ended up being fine, of course,
Yeah.
but, um, I was the only person that I knew that cared about this up until
Yeah.
mid-February, and then the Diamond Princess happened, and that's when everybody's focus,
Yeah.
went on it because everybody was expecting it to be this death tube, um, but then it wasn't, right? Then it like nobody died, like a couple people died, but they were very old and very, out of shape, and it was like, "Huh, this isn't Armageddon." And then the media moved on, and I remember being like, "Huh, why would they do that?" Because that's a victory, like, that's a good thing that everybody didn't die. We were told that they were all gonna die, but they didn't die. And, very quickly after that, I remember being like, "Wait a second. This entire thing feels like, a snowball of crazy." And I think I might have been, overly concerned about this. And what are they trying to do now? Flatten the curve? What does that mean? And I was like, so I started talking to my kids about it.
Yeah.
And then they started talking about how everybody wanted to cancel schools. And I remember being like, no, we should not do that. And then they did. And they said, we'll be back in 2 weeks. And I remember I was the only person in my town after 2 weeks was like, let's go back. And they were like, why do you want to kill grandma? And it was at that point I knew it was all over. I knew we were doomed. But my kids, I've always talked to my kids. I wouldn't say as adults, but I've always made a point to have, frank conversations with them. Because I remember growing up, people didn't do that with me. I was smart enough. I remember people
Yeah.
talking down to me and like keeping things from me. And like this is stupid quick story, but like I remember when I was like 8 or 9, I was eating dinner and they told me it was pork chops. And I was like eating this thing and I bit down. I was like, what is this? I pulled out a pellet from my mouth, like a lead pellet from a pellet gun. And I
Yikes.
was like, what is this? They were like, "Oh, we don't know." I'm like, "Do they kill pigs with pellets? I don't think they do that." And my mom and my grandmother who had it was like a family meal, they were all kinda, embarrassed. They're like, "Well, we didn't
Yeah.
wanna tell you, but that's rabbit." I'm like,
Oh.
"I don't care. Like, why are you guys trying like, what are you lying to me about eating rabbit?" And they're like, "Well, we just didn't think that you wanted to eat thumper." I'm like, "Well, how old do you fucking think I am?" Like, but my point is like, I remember when I was a kid that
Yeah.
yeah, like, like adults tend to do that. They baby stuff. And, again, it's not like I, pull the wool off of everything from my kids. They're still young, but I made a point to talk to them about this stuff. So to answer your question the long way, absolutely. They were along for the ride on COVID, told them what I thought. My wife was not quite in lockstep with that yet. She was still
Yeah.
kind of behind by a couple weeks or a couple months at first. And I would tell them, I would say, look, I hate to say this, but like I'm not 100% sure either. I don't know exactly what's going on, but I'm pretty sure that this is bullshit. Right. So, let's just keep an eye on this. And every little thing that happened, we would talk about it, talked about the pros and the cons. Um, whether or not we felt like this was overreach. We talked a lot about liberty, about a lot about, and they learned a lot about, sort of the founding of the country and about, the Enlightenment, about, individuality and about where rights come from. Um, so there was a pretty good lesson in there, but at the same time, they couldn't go to camp, they couldn't go outside, they couldn't go to a park,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. How did that impact how they interacted with their friends and things like that, you know?
Massively,
Yeah.
hugely, hugely. And then the other thing is that there was definitely some blowback locally about my stance. I was not, combative necessarily. I was
Yeah.
very, you know chill and I think adult about how I interacted. It was not returned. I was immediately kicked off of the local, parent Facebook group, just because I questioned, again, I just asked the
Yeah,
question. I was like, really, should we really be doing this? Like,
yeah.
what are we doing? And they were just like, you're dangerous. You're out of this. And all of a sudden it was like, it was affecting our relationships. It was affecting our stance in the community. And like, nobody said it to my face really, but like there were certainly, other parents that were like, we're not going to let our kids play with your kids anymore because of, your opinions on this stuff. And my kids had to, I was honest with them about that. And they were like, "Well, they're bad people." I'm like, "Well, no, not really." I'm not happy with what they did. I think it was an overreaction. Hopefully someday they'll understand that that was really shitty what they did. But to your point before, I think that most of these people had good intentions. And I willingly grant good intentions. I just think that I'm old enough to know that, you know, good intentions are like, really, really awful sometimes. They lead us into really bad places. So,
I don't know what I don't know if I can ever forgive them. I bet, Eric, that, getting back, you talk about the videos. What do you say to your kids though if they and let's say you got a kid who's 6 or 7 years old and not porn, but he stumbles onto the video of Arena Zarutska getting stabbed on the Charlotte's train.
yeah.
And in some cases, I think I'd rather my kids stumble onto porn than stumble onto
Oh, yeah.
that.
I agree with you.
You know,
They see that shit. They do, you know? Um, and again, I want I don't know. On the other hand, as a kid, especially when you get a teenager, you don't wanna, like, have to talk about everything, it's like, I get it, but at least up until that point where they're starting to try and be, their own people, little grown-ups, you wanna give them the base, you wanna give them the support early on to be able to, question this stuff and, give it some perspective, and again, that's been the conversation that we've had over and over again, which is, every time that they're like, "Hey, we saw this thing or this happened, and therefore that person's bad and that person's good," or "That's right and that's wrong," and sometimes that's true, but most of the time it's not. It's not that cut and dry. Um, Obviously not what you're referring to. It's just absolutely fucking horrible. But,
yeah.
they are gonna see stuff like that, and I think that the best I can do as a parent is set them up to when they do see stuff like that is to analyze it, and again, it's a young brain. I didn't even see stuff like that violent that early. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't see hardcore porn or like, we saw movies and to your point, I think everybody knows this, but especially in the West, the movies are much more okay with graphic violence than boobs, right? Which I think is a problem.
Yeah,
But,
I've always wondered about that too. And things have evolved a lot of different ways. I mean, for example, you would see a lot more blood on ER than you would on MASH. I mean,
yeah,
they would just be more graphic with it and just really show you how ugly it is. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but sometimes they just wanted to sanitize things. But I also think that there was sometimes a certain innocence with TV that's kind of been lost. Things were implied but not directly put out there, where it
sure.
was just in your face. I mean,
Yeah. And, we hear that with, music too. We've tried to raise our kids to listen to ton of music. Like we love
yeah,
music, we play music, but you listen to the lyrics, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and the most tawdry stuff is just suggestive, right? But nowadays it's the lyrics, yeah, the popular, rated NC-17. Like, they're just
yeah.
like, what? Um, and again, I don't know.
And there's still that impact that will have on kids is, when you get that advisory is that kids shouldn't watch this, and the kids still say, "Well, yeah, now I definitely want to watch it."
Now you definitely wanna
Because once
watch.
you made
Yep.
it forbidden, it's they want to see it. I don't know how you go there. It's a
I would've as a kid, I would've seen it, You know what I mean? I remember, like, when I was a teenager, that's when the PMRC was going on. That was Tipper Gore,
Oh,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
they were putting all the labels and banning music and stuff, and I remember just being like, "That's just retarded. Like, stop that," you know? Um, I still think that was retarded. Yeah, I'm pretty libertarian and that sort of stuff. But, children are they're not adults. There's a reason why they don't have full, adult rights on anything. I do think that we need to decide if it's 18 or 21, by the way, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean, like, legally, I don't understand how that hangs around. It's like you gotta choose one. You can't be an adult and, half the shit society and not an adult in the other. Um, so at this point, I would probably argue 21. That sounds pretty drastic, but I do think that since people are living a lot longer, um, and society is very different, people are younger longer these days.
that I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, though.
No, no, but what I'm
And
saying
it's
is
not
that
because we've tried to we've tried to have this where kids are exposed to something, but then they're more protected, and we
oh, yeah,
have these ridiculous my grandfather was 6 years old and walking 2 miles to school each way. I don't think this is a positive trend at all. I mean, I think I'd rather live in a society now where kids are still walking 2 miles to school each way as 6-year-olds. I think that would be,
yeah.
you know
Well, it's interesting how we've kinda come full circle around back to the self-esteem movement, right? Because at the core of that was protecting children
Yeah,
from bad feelings, right? The feeling of not succeeding or the feeling of not winning. And what we were just talking about is, another piece of that puzzle, which is protecting children from, another aspect of life, sex, right?
yeah,
Violence. Um, you know, I think if it was just like sex, wouldn't be an issue, but this is like hardcore, like choking porn. Like this is just like
yeah,
bonkers, stuff. But it still kind of is coming from the same place. I think that, free range kids, I'm totally in that camp, right? I do
yeah.
think that, kids do better when you just let them go. The Gen X cliches are real. Like, don't come home until the streetlights come on. If you want water, drink from the hose. There's a lot of
Yeah, and
really bad shit that we
I
just
think
want.
kids would probably have more self-esteem if that was the case, if you actually trusted them to do things, and and you're going to have, and granted, some every once in a while, something bad's going to happen, but,
Oh, yeah,
and instead of raising a generation of kids that are soft, that couple who was charged because, they let their kids walk to the store, and then one of the
that's
kids
right.
gets hit by
There's
a
been a
car.
couple of those the last year,
That
yeah.
was so, and, that was pretty close. That's in Gastonia, which is pretty close to Charlotte, and that is, stuff like that just,
It's
when
idiot.
there was a sign in the Austin library that said, "No kids under 10 years old by themselves," I thought, "What?" I mean, I know I went to the library by myself when I was 7. It's
Well, but that's this leftist bullshit where they don't wanna enforce the rules, right? So,
yeah,
probably where that came from is you had some unsupervised kids, young, dumb kids going to the library and honestly probably not behaving right, like, stealing shit or,
well,
messing stuff up or breaking stuff. And instead of actually holding people accountable, they decided to just do a blanket ban, right? That's what tends to happen with stuff like that. I would bet that that's the deal.
they do everything blanket, and talking I can even remember, things getting, when I went, and my 2 brothers went to Moundsville Junior High, 7th grade to 9th grade. And when lunch came, they were allowed to leave. When I was in junior high, same school, no, we weren't allowed to leave. It was,
Yep,
and all because one girl gets hit by a car somewhere.
yep,
And there's always, and this is the one thing that I think is yeah, you have something that works 999 times out of 1,000, it works. But because there's one failure in 1,000, everybody says, well, we have to change everything now.
yeah.
It's like,
Th
why?
that happens a lot. Um, I was just talking with a friend of mine
Yeah.
who, has to put these child guards around his pool.
Oh,
Um, right? They live down in Florida, um, and they live in a retirement community. Like, there's no kids. Like, and they actually their house has a fence around the entire house,
Yeah,
right? But they passed these regulations within the last 5 years where you 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 have to put in a toddler fence, which is right around the pool, and also water alarms in case some, mysterious rambling toddler, falls into your pool so you can, jump into action. And
yeah,
that's exactly the kind of stuff that you're talking about. It's like, no, that's the responsibility of the parent. Like, if you're dumb enough,
yeah,
I'm sorry, it's a tragedy. It's awful. Nobody wants to see some toddler wander into a pool and drown. But, you know, don't let your toddler wander. If you have a pool of your own and toddlers,
yeah,
you might wanna get some of these safety features, right? But it's not government's place to actually, force people to do this. And to your point, where those rules and those laws come from is, somebody reads a national news story, some toddler falls in a
yeah,
pool. Like, "Oh my gosh, we have to save these
yeah,
mysterious toddlers."
yeah, and, lawn darts and,
Jarts.
it's
I
just,
had
yeah,
those.
making every I don't know, it's a very sanitized existence, and I don't know,
In
kids are
some
gonna get more
aspects,
kids are gonna end up
right?
being more anxious, and and if you were also, a teenager in the '80s like I was, you probably remember Jessica McClure,
That name rings a bell. What is that?
fell down the well in Midland, Texas.
Oh, it's been so many.
This was in the days pre-internet days. That was on every
Yeah,
that was
I
on the
do
whole
remember that.
country's mind for a couple days.
Yeah,
Get this girl out and, and you look at it, realize, yeah, they probably should have done something with this whole and not so this girl doesn't fall down it, but, you know, she did get out and it was but it's also nice to see that, that was also a time though when everybody could rally around something and just, there were no, but I'm glad there were no charges, no arrests, just this was unfortunate, but we got it fixed,
absolutely.
get the
It's
girl out of the
unfortunate.
hole after she's in there for what, 2 or 3 days. Geez, it was crazy how that, yeah.
Yeah.
She's as far as I know, she's okay. Like,
But there's a weird hodgepodge of sort of protectionism,
yeah,
right? Where it's the kind of stuff we're talking about, but also, on the other hand, the stuff we were just talking about, the open internet,
yeah,
um, they're not protected.
yeah,
We try, but again, it's just this onslaught. So it's this weird thing where we've lost the latchkey kids, we've lost the free range. Most kids are helicoptered and, grow up in these little bubbles, but at the same time, they have these little magic devices where they can sort of be washed in the sort of the worst of the worst.
yeah.
It's a weird combo of, you know, safety and, wide open,
Safety and wide
freedom.
open. It was just like I told the guy from the podcast Appalachian Liberty, and he said something like the first time he touched a gun when he was 10. I said, "You were an old man." So for that area, he is.
Yeah.
That's a but yeah. I don't know how I worry how we get out of this. There's just a lot of crazy things that it seems like to me we need. The whole expert class is so corrupted now, and I don't know how you fix that
Well,
other than just
yeah, it's a problem, and I would argue that the expert class is exactly what the subject of this we started talking about, which is what happened with the self-esteem movement. That was the expert class got behind that, right? They crafted these studies and these statistics to feed that narrative, and it was released to the public on Oprah, and it took over Western civilization there for a while. This is what they do. They have a lot of money. They
yeah,
have a lot of passion, right? And they have a lot of power. And again, that's where good intentions go bad wrong. you know?
Yeah, I don't know where we go from here. I just, it's, well, it's, yeah, yeah, and I don't know if there's anything else to say about everybody gets a trophy. It seems like we've kind of covered the whole thing. But, it's also spread, to kind of into academia, where everybody gets an A or everybody passes. It's,
Oh, yeah. No,
the
it's awful. I mean,
yeah,
the standards as a parent, the standards have fallen so low, especially since 2020. I think that they were going down before then, but, along with just the instead of, admitting the deficit that they created in 2020 and beyond, honestly, and trying to make up for it, they just pretended that it didn't exist, that they just lowered the standards, right? Like, in our school in New York, after COVID, they came out with this suite of measurements of the academic, standing of the district, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, it's surprisingly good." Everybody at first was like, "Oh, phew," "thank God that catastrophe, didn't harm the children as much as we thought it would." But then you start scratching the surface and you realize that the stats are good only because they changed the benchmarks. They completely lowered the expectations of everything. Like, my kids were like, after 2020, my kid who was 12 at the time, they assessed him and he was reading, at he was reading at over a 12th grade level. And if at first we were like, "Oh my gosh, our little genius." Our kid's smart, but, like, we were like, "Whoa, that's pretty good." But then we looked a little closer and we're like, "Wait a second, like, these 12th grade standards are not the same 12th grade standards, right?" They lowered the standards. The same this and there's other causes for that too. There's the, sort of essentially the affirmative action that's been going on in education and, higher education for
yeah.
a long time, and it's really destructive.
Mhm. Yeah, I would, that's why I would often at library sales, I would always buy the math books before 1970.
Yeah,
And, and there's some of the books I haven't gotten rid of, although I probably should get rid of all my books, but I'm just looking at myself where I'm not gonna find these anywhere.
that's
I'm not
right.
gonna find them again. There's no way because the whole point being is that the math books were actually tough back then.
They were. Have you seen the way they have a few new ways of teaching math now?
I haven't looked at them. I actually am planning on doing something like that myself, but
Yeah.
it's, teaching there are I a lot of these curriculums are probably designed, again, by people who don't know what they're talking about, so,
Yeah.
uh, it's, but let's keep in mind Maria Montessori never took, an education class. She was a medical doctor, and she devised a system that worked. It's,
Yeah, man.
there are just too many people. There's just too many interests that, want the citizenry to be stupid and immature, and I don't know how you get around that, and
Or I would argue that they assume that the citizenry is stupid and immature, and the policies that they champion and implement, perpetuate that, right? Like, I would argue that the left, in general, the progressives especially, they treat minorities like retards. Every single policy they have, it's like they're patting, you know, black or brown people on the top of their head and saying, "We got you. We're gonna help you, retarded people, and
yeah,
we're gonna give you a leg up here." And it's like, what? How's that
I
helpful?
That's the thing, though. I don't know how I could ever forgive the people in your neighborhood, though, who wanted you out of this group and stuff. I would never,
I mean, I'm not
and
like,
and they will never apologize. I'll bet money on
of course
that.
not. Well, no, I mean, to be fair, I have definitely, gotten some plaudits since. No apologies. No, they all feel like that they did the right thing. It was the fog of war for them, and they made, the best decision they could at the time, which was tyranny, apparently.
And that's fundamentally the problem.
Mhm.
Yeah, what percentage of the population of Earth could be turned into worshiping sociopaths? I think it wouldn't be that hard.
No.
I think it would be much easier to do that than to turn them into libertarians, which is why I've become largely a separatist. Well, this has been a good show. Do you have anything else to say before we go?
Uh, no, again, I think it was interesting. I think we
Yeah,
went on a little trip. We started off with the, participation trophies,
yeah,
but everything we talked about was kind of interestingly connected to a lot of the same DNA. And just to put it, put it to bed a little bit, like, the reason this subject interested me is because, well, first of all, I was like, "Where did this come from?" Right? I remember this. People still talk about this. It's become the butt of jokes. There's actually been some articles, in the last, 10 years that, like, tried to defend, participation trophies. But my reasoning for digging into this and trying to figure out where it came from was that I had a suspicion that it was what it ended up being, which was, you know, s somebody pushing this and, having enough, personality and enough gravity around it to bring people in, to bring money in, to bring policy in, and to sort of create a critical mass. And it's these things where again, we've said the phrase good intentions a whole lot in the last hour.
yeah,
And, you know, again, who are you to say that kids don't deserve self-esteem, Chris? It's like these are the kind of arguments that you have. And this is
yeah,
where conservatives, Republicans, even libertarians tend to lose ground to a lot of these really awful, harmful progressive ideas. And
yeah,
I think it's cowardice. I think it's just this desire to get along and to not say no and to not and it's bad. These
yeah.
things aren't they have real downsides.
Oh, yeah.
Even something that's, empathy and self-esteem and, inclusion and, you know, it's hard to listen to those where even the word progress, progressive, like, who wouldn't want progress? It's like, well,
Yeah.
progress is great, dude. Like, can we at least admit that?
Yeah,
Um,
you end up with we didn't talk about but also reflective, I think, to show was what happens at that Phillies baseball game with the guy
yeah,
who gets the baseball fair and square, and then some woman comes over and starts chewing him out, and he gives it up. It's just I don't know how really that's and I don't know anything about this woman, and she's probably gotten way too much attention than she deserves, but it's just where do you just this society of people who just wanna nag. And I don't know how we get out of this, and it's often just, hurt feelings and not anything that's a real
that's right.
something that's measurable or real. It's always
Not real.
feelings. I don't
Yeah,
know where, but yeah, it's and, I think we yeah, it's, well, we'll try to figure something out here, but at least we're getting conversations rolling about it, so, yeah.
agree.
Okay, well, where are you out there, Eric, on the web?
Oh, on the web?
Yeah,
I mean, I just post on X. This is my
okay, your Twitter,
at
yeah,
the bottom
okay.
there, Erich
Please
Hartmann.
like this show, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel, Escape from the Village, check out my Substack. People are giving me money at Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you, Eric Hartman. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.